listener production.
Hello, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. When you think about some of the things your taxes help fund, your mind might go to new roads, hospitals and schools. But what about paying for strippers and drug dealers on job sites?
If a politician under our Westminster system presides over serious corruption, they should be held to account. That's not happened in this case.
A deep dive into the allegations surrounding one of Australia's most powerful unions and the new report claiming the government has been turning a blind eye is coming up in the second half of this episode. But first, it is time for the headlines with Chris Spyrou on Tuesday, the 17th of February.
Morning, Sash. There are questions today about whether the Liberal Party will push ahead with a proposed ban on migrants from parts of Muslim countries. It comes after a hardline policy drafted under Susan Lee was leaked yesterday, with reports she was planning to announce the new position this week if she hadn't been rolled by Angus Taylor. The policy would have seen immigrants from specific regions designated as being under the control of terrorist groups banned from coming to Australia.
Yeah, so the 37 specific regions are in 13 countries: Afghanistan, Algeria, Cameroon, Egypt, Lebanon, Libya, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Palestine, the Philippines, Somalia and Yemen. Now, the new opposition leader has faced questions about whether he knew about this policy.
Well, I know it didn't go through Shadow Cabinet or the leadership, and as I understand it, it wasn't seen by the relevant immigration shadows. So, frankly, I don't know what the document is, I don't know where it's come from, and I don't know what's in it.
That was Taylor on ABC's 7:30 last night. But when he was pushed on whether he would support such a ban, he had this to say.
The standards have been too low, the numbers have been too high, and importantly, we need to make sure that we shut the door on people who don't adopt our core values and beliefs.
So the language there, shut the door, is being picked up by people as kind of a key as to whether Angus Taylor would support such a policy. Now, it is understood the Lee proposal would have also seen a process established to try to remove 100,000 asylum seekers and international students from Australia more quickly.
Yeah, we've also heard from the Liberal spokesperson for immigration, Paul Scar. He's come out since the document leak saying he never signed off on it. So too has the Home Affairs spokesperson, John O'Duniam. Moderates within the party, Sash, they're now worried that this policy will be adopted under Angus Taylor, and they're pretty much warning him against such a hardline stance on immigrants. I mean, very interesting to see this report drop, and interesting to see Susan Lee playing in this space. You know, since coming to power, she very much was someone who was trying to pull the Libs back to the centre. I guess with all the polling around One Nation, she was kind of trying to throw something to attract those conservative votes who were moving to One Nation.
Yeah, well, that's one of the theories, is that she was planning to play in this space more. And, there are theories as to, well, why was this document leaked? Some think it was backers of Lee who put it out to say, look, she was going to do this and you rolled her on migration when she was going to actually take a much harder stance. But it's also exposed quite a messy process of deciding on policies within the Liberal Party, because if Lee was preparing to go public with this week, which according to sources within the party she was, without the support of her immigration spokesperson and the Home Affairs spokesperson, I mean, that says a lot about how a party is coming up with policies and then rolling them out. And we know that this has been the problem with the Liberals for years. So Angus Taylor is facing a hurdle early on into his tenure. And, some say that's another reason that this was put out, was to try and trip him up.
Overseas now, and to Syria, where a group of Australian families linked to Islamic State fighters have been turned around while trying to come home. It's believed 11 so-called ISIS brides and 23 children left the notorious Al-Roj detention camp in northeastern Syria last night, however were turned back by Syrian authorities about 50 k's into the journey.
They were en route to the Syrian capital Damascus, where they were expected to then travel to Beirut and then Australia, but were blocked by local authorities. Syrian officials insist the trip to Australia has not been cancelled, but has been delayed for an unknown amount of time, possibly hours or maybe days.
While we're yet to find out why, it's believed the 3 Australian men accompanying them had not arranged the correct permissions between the factions governing the region in Syria. So, I mean, to put this into context, Sash, Syria, after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, in 2024, it's a country that doesn't have a uniform governing body. It never really has, especially the different factions ruling different parts. So we know that this part of Syria that they're in, where the detention camp is in, that's held by Kurdish forces, and Kurdish forces are the ones that said, this group didn't have the relevant paperwork according to reports. what we do know about these Australian families, these are believed to be about 11 Australian families. They've been held in detention in Syria since 2019. So around the time that the Islamic Caliphate fell, they're held because of their connections to ISIS fighters, or perhaps they were people that joined the Islamic State in that time. A number of these families and children and wives of ISIS fighters have been repatriated over the years. We know of 8 orphans in 2019 under Scott Morrison. We know that 4 women and 13 kids were returned under Anthony Albanese in 2022. That was met with a lot of backlash and a lot of community concern around safety. So the government in this instance has said that they have not been involved in this whatsoever. They're kind of keeping their hands clean. But usual process is that if an Australian does make it to an Australian embassy, the government, as a matter of procedure, will typically provide them a passport. So we don't know whether that's happened here. We don't know whether that process is one that's been followed here. More information will be coming out about this. But also, the fact that we don't know a lot says that lessons have been learnt since 2022. There was massive backlash. So, I mean, yeah, this is one to follow.
A grandparent of missing 4-year-old Gus Lamont has been arrested following a renewed search of the South Australian property he disappeared from in September last year. 75-year-old Josie Murray has been charged with firearm offences after police searched the Oak Park station yesterday. They've since been bailed and are set to appear in court in May for the charges, which police maintain are unrelated to young Gus's disappearance.
Authorities have declared Gus's disappearance a major crime, with police investigating whether he walked off the property, was abducted, or that someone known to him was involved in his disappearance and suspected death. Detectives are yet to find any evidence to suggest he was abducted or had wandered off. The search, described by South Australian Police as the largest in their history, remains ongoing, and we do know that detectives will remain in the area today.
Intermittent fasting has been having its moment in the sun over the last decade as a major tool in weight loss, but a new study has found it makes, quote, little to no difference. Researchers have looked into the diet trend, which sees people restrict eating to shorter windows in the day, like the 5-2 diet, or maybe even fasting on some days and eating normally on other days.
Yeah, they found that compared to giving people traditional advice on dieting, like cutting back calories and eating better, intermittent fasting did little to help people drop kilos or improve their quality of life. The review found people lost about 3% of their body weight through fasting, far below the 5% that doctors consider clinically meaningful. Researchers did admit, though, that more study is needed into whether it could improve our overall health by changing some bodily functions. Oh, yes.
Set the scene, Chris. Oh, we enter the world of aliens and extraterrestrials. For some reason, I went weird horror voice.
You went full Simpsons then, you really did.
So sorry. Look, let's get to the story. Barack Obama has been forced to clarify his comments on aliens after setting the internet on fire this week when he said this.
Are aliens real?
They're real, but I haven't seen them, and they're not being kept in, what is it?
Area 51?
Area 51. There's no underground facility unless there's this enormous conspiracy and they hid it from the President of the United States.
So yes, that was the former US president saying aliens are real, but in a post to Instagram, he's had to come out and say he saw no evidence of aliens being real or making contact with us while he was leader.
Yes, and also his comment, what's it called? Area 51? Okay, Obama, okay. It's long been theorised that the US government is hiding knowledge about extraterrestrials and is even hiding the bodies of dead aliens at Area 51, a highly classified US Air Force base in the Nevada desert that Obama claims he doesn't know the name off the top of his head. Okay.
Oh, people love to theorise about this. In June 2019, there was actually a poll by YouGov that found more than half, so 54% of US adults think it's likely that the government knows more than it's telling us about UFOs, unidentified flying objects. Obama did talk about that as well recently, and he was like, yeah, man, like there's stuff that we don't know. It's flying around in the sky and we can't quite figure out what it is. So, but he has clarified, though, he does not know that aliens are real and saw no proof while he was president.
Sure, mate, sure. All right. That is it for our headlines for today. Thank you for joining us. Up next is my deep dive into a union that is one of Australia's most powerful that you've definitely heard about. And we are diving deep into a new report that's accusing the government of knowing all about their misconduct. Stick around, that's coming up for you next.
You've shown no remorse or apologised for her death.
Hi, I'm Alison Sandy, National Investigations Editor at the 7 Network.
He was the last person to see her after they had an argument at their family home.
And I've got a new podcast out.
I've got nothing to say to you.
Kiss and Kill is a deep dive on some of the nation's most notorious killer narcissists and expert abusers.
Very deliberate manipulation.
Examining their telltale signs and patterns of behaviour.
To make her think that she's nuts.
Do you know the single biggest predictor that somebody could escalate dangerously?
So you know exactly what to look out for.
Is that they are controlling.
More women are being murdered by their partners than ever before.
Introducing Kiss and Kill.
He used to call her princess.
To listen, search Kiss and Kill on the Listener app or wherever you get your podcasts.
A crime syndicate's playground.
CFMEU crime syndicate has cost the state $15 to $30 billion.
The Premier needs to explain how that occurred under her watch.
Sites were hotbeds for drug trafficking and even strippers.
Mobsters hiring strippers to work on job sites. Tradies getting paid for shifts they never worked, and entire drug networks operating on the public purse. That's the picture being painted in a major report that's accusing one union of bleeding taxpayers out of an eye-watering $15 billion. And the kicker? The government's believed to have known about it, but chosen to look the other way. I'm talking about the CFMEU in Victoria, and if all of this sounds familiar, it should. Journos have been exposing stories of bikie infiltration, standover tactics and corruption linked to parts of the union's construction division in Victoria for years now. But just last week, a leading barrister and former anti-corruption counsel handed down his findings to a government inquiry in a whole other state. And that massive price tag was put front and centre. Now, the pressure's on for the Victorian government to announce a royal commission to dig into every criminal link and, more importantly, why nothing was done sooner.
$15 billion of taxpayer money has gone into the pockets of bikies, of organised crime figures, of underworld figures on the Labor government's watch. Today, the Victorian Liberal and Nationals are announcing our terms of reference into a royal commission into CFMEU misconduct in Victoria. We will chase down every single cent of that $15 billion. We want to know where it went, into whose pockets, because this isn't the government's money. This isn't Jacinta Allen's money. This is taxpayers' money.
That was State Opposition Leader Jess Wilson, and as the calls grow louder, Premier Jacinta Allen is continuing to claim the figures are untested, all the while refusing to greenlight a state-based probe.
The former federal Liberal government conducted a royal commission. It went for years. All it resulted in was 5 failed criminal investigations. That is not getting the outcome because clearly it did not address the issue that we are now talking about.
Someone who knows this story inside out is award-winning journalist from The Age, Nick McKenzie. Nick, welcome back to the briefing. It feels like Groundhog Day every time we have you on to chat about the CFMEU and Victoria. Can you walk us through some of the new details that we learnt last week?
Yeah, listen, I really look forward to the day that you guys don't call me to ask me to talk about the CFMEU in Victoria, but it's not Groundhog Day for this reason. For the first time ever, last week we had a formal inquiry say unequivocally that the Victorian government knew that there was significant organised crime and corruption on its major projects funded by every taxpayer in Australia through federal Albanese government funding and Victorian funding, knew that this corruption was going on and turned a blind eye. So basically enabling it. And think about that. That's money going into the pockets of bikie gangs, gangland figures, corrupt players, dodgy companies. The other critical thing to really explode into this story was this conclusion that the cost of that rorting and corruption and waste was $15 billion. That's the conclusion of Geoffrey Watson, SC, this anti-corruption expert. So they are major, major findings. The government knew and turned a blind eye, and it cost taxpayers 15 billion smackaroos.
I guess the question is why?
Well, it's a huge problem for the government. The accusation that its negligence or its turning a blind eye was enabling crime gangs, the Comancheros, the rebels, the Mongols, gangland figures to profit on state government jobs with the backing of corrupt CFMEU officials that's a stunning allegation or conclusion. There's a lot of evidence that it's correct. And it's a huge political headache or nightmare for Labor, specifically the Victorian Labor government, but to an extent as well, the Albanese government. There's long been a stench around the CFMEU, but to have this all laid bare as it was last week and to really explode into the national debate and national conscience is really significant. Why is Labor ducking and weaving? Well, it would seem to be that the Victorian government at least does not want the public to know who knew what when and why there wasn't action taken. Those questions aren't going away as the scandal keeps rolling and rolling and rolling.
I guess I want to talk a little bit about the redactions. We kind of had this report drop. So this is all happening in Queensland. There's an inquiry going on into the CFMEU there. And then we had this report drop in some capacity with redactions, and then we had it released without redactions, or at least we've heard about what was redacted. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's a confusing state of affairs. I mean, the fact that we have a Queensland Commission of Inquiry into the CFMEU examining what went on with the CFMEU in Victoria is already a bit head-spinning, but ultimately that's politics at play. The Queensland government is a Conservative government, so it's called a Royal Commission-style inquiry up north to look at the CFMEU. The Victorian government's Labor, it's refusing such an inquiry. So what happened is the Victorian CFMEU administration, this is the people put in charge of the CFMEU to clean it up, put in charge by the Albanese government in the middle of 2024, led by a barrister called Mark Irving KC. They hired Jeff Watson, SC, a corruption expert, to go investigating, to do his landmark report into just how corrupt the CFMEU was and the involvement of bikies and others in this rot. So Watson had two key chapters, one that said the Victorian government knew about this corruption, turned a blind eye until it cost taxpayer $15 billion. Mark Irving, as CFMEU administrator, Labor appointed, deleted those chapters from the report that was to be aired in public by the Queensland Commission of Inquiry. So we discovered that those deletions had been made through our own investigations. We asked Irving why they'd been made and began the hunt to get them. Irving ultimately released those deleted chapters to us and we published them, laying bare what Watson had found. But suddenly the question was, well, why were they deleted in the first place? Accusations of a political cover-up, the calls for Irving to stand down. Irving in response says no. He said that he found those chapters were not properly founded, did not have a fundamentally good base for Watson to make those conclusions, a base of evidence. But of course, it's left open a pretty big question. Why is it that the only large chunks redacted from this major landmark corruption report just happened to be the only parts of that report that were specifically dedicated to Labor negligence and wrongdoing and the cost of taxpayers? Why is it the most politically sensitive bits of that report were removed? And that question remains fairly open. To boil it down, was there a political whitewash, a political cover-up?
Well, that seems to be, the line that the Premier Jacinta Allen's going with. She's saying that this $15 billion price tag is, quote, untested. She's also shutting down talk of a Royal Commission. Now, there's big pressure on her, at least from the opposition, to announce a Royal Commission into all of this. What do you make of her opposition here?
It's entirely predictable. Let's not forget Jacinta Allen, the Premier, used to be the Infrastructure and Transport Minister. She is responsible for these very projects where this corruption, gangland infiltration took place. Yeah, sure, she said this figure of $15 billion is untested. And yes, it is untested, but there's a big problem for the Premier. Murray Furlong, he's the public servant that runs the Fair Work Commission. This is the union watchdog. He's an apolitical public servant. He came out last week and said the figure could even be higher than $15 billion. And in fact, Victorian government officials had told him privately up to 30% of these project costs, the entire project's $100 billion, could involve waste, mismanagement and corruption. So there is another very credible voice backing that $15 billion figure. But ultimately, the Premier is faced with a conundrum. If it's not $15 billion, well, how much is it? And without a proper inquiry, we'll never know. I mean, $1 of taxpayer money going to a bikie gang is $1 too much. Is it $15 billion? Is it $1 billion? Is it $100 million? Is it $30 billion? The taxpayers of Australia deserve to know.
In terms of feasible lines of inquiry, the Royal Commission or calls for a Royal Commission is one such way in which we could get those answers. Are there other tools at the Labor government's disposal that they could be exploring aside from a Royal Commission?
What could happen right now? The Premier of Victoria could appoint an expert or a former judge, give them compulsory powers, give them an investigation team, and go and answer the question, how was it these Victorian government projects funded by federal and state taxpayers, how was it that it came to be that bikie gangs infested these projects, that corruption was happening on these projects? Which bureaucrats, which public servants, which politicians knew about this? Why didn't they act? And in what way should they be held meaningfully accountable? You know, if a politician under our Westminster system presides over serious corruption, they should be held to account. That's not happened in this case. This inquiry could have been called yesterday. It can be called today. And the public deserve to know about it. Now, if the Premier's contention is that she's always acted on allegations of corruption and wrongdoing and there's nothing to worry about, then she should welcome such an inquiry because it would absolve her. I think every day that there's a delay in having a proper inquiry in Victoria to look at these questions is a day we can rightfully ask the Premier, well, what are you covering up?
How likely do you think it is that we will get those answers, and how soon do you think that's going to happen?
I think on balance, it's probably unlikely. While Labor holds power in Victoria, there won't be a proper sweeping inquiry unless something dramatic changes. Of course, those dramatic changes are happening. We've had a big week last week of pressure on the government. There's probably going to be more pressure this week. It will become very likely if the Conservatives win power in Victoria at the November election this year. But I think they've got a lot of work to do to get there. So what can we expect in the meantime? Well, we can expect more of these allegations to keep dribbling out. I mean, you can't have bikie gangs on government projects. You can't have bribes being paid. You can't have allegations of women being sexually exploited on these projects or drug trafficking on these projects without this continually dribbling out to the press, without journalists, investigative reporters and others asking these questions, without the opposition pursuing the case, and without people, whistleblowers, building workers, honest unionists. Lots of people are pissed off at this corruption scandal and they don't want to see it go away and they want to see people held to account. So I think it's going to keep bubbling away in Victoria and nationally until we have some bigger answers.
I know whenever we do a story on the CFMEU, we do have some listeners who are members of the union in some capacity, and they do, relay to us the importance of having a strong body that advocates for their wages, their safety, and, helps them bargain with employers. I guess, what's your message to them when they listen to these developments or the way that we speak about them and they think we are almost undoing all the good work that the CFMEU does?
I'm a lifelong member of my union. I absolutely support unions. But any decent union member or unionist is opposed to corruption. Of course, the vast majority of CFMEU members are just good, hardworking people who've joined a union to have their conditions pay, their safety looked after. That's absolutely spot on. But those same people, you can support the CFMEU and honest unionism and be opposed to corruption. These people don't care about worker safety. They do not. They care about lining their pockets. They put workers at risk every day. So, ultimately, we want a union rebuilt, corruption-free, and that's happening. The other major part of this scandal is there's not a single company that's been yet held meaningfully to account. You can't have a racket on a big building site with just a corrupt unionist. You need the gangster as the middleman. You need the corrupt unionist, and you need the building company. Because the building company is the one who hires the gangster to sort out the problem, and there's probably a brown paper bag passed under a table. Now, ultimately, there's no building companies that have been properly held to account for hiring gangland figures, for hiring bikie bosses, for encouraging and fueling this corruption. That's also got to happen. And I think the proud members of the CFMEU would agree with me when I say that.
Nick McKenzie, thank you so much for stepping out these latest developments with us yet again on The Briefing.
My pleasure.
That was award-winning journalist from The Age, Nick McKenzie, speaking with me there. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. If you enjoyed this chat or you learned something new, why not leave us a rate and a review? And while you're there, flick it over to a mate. I'm Spyrou. I'll catch you next time.